Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about how to make people hate you at any job so that basically you can avoid doing these things. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, and typically I'm here with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about the things you can do to make people hate you at any job. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, our pleasure. So this should be a fun episode. What are some common pet peeves that you have heard from bosses about employees over the course of your career?
There are lots of them.
Yeah, it's amazing the things people do where you're like, wow, did you really just do that in a professional setting?
And there's always new ones every single year.
Absolutely.
Definitely not showing up on time for meetings, for events, for anything like that. You should be on time.
I know. I remember I was actually late to my very first day of summer associateshipness, which I was a 1L at the time. So I was like, well, I guess they know I don't really actually care that much since I'm now late. I felt bad.
Did you have a good excuse?
I just didn't really realize how long I was going to... I think it was raining. I didn't have an umbrella and I had to get back for one. And then I also just really didn't realize how long it was going to take to get there on the subway because I was changing trains 4 times or something.
It happens, but I would say plan ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'd recommend. Although apparently Barack Obama was late on his first day too, so I'm in good company.
That's good. Another thing would be saying you're going to go to something and not showing up. So it doesn't mean that
makes people mad.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you can't have something else come up and not be able to do something. But you should definitely prioritize what's the most important thing that you're picking and why, and then make sure that you let people know. So that could be like a social event, a meeting, anything.
No, I remember sometimes when I was working in a firm, we would get invited to like pretty fancy dinners that I feel like were fairly expensive. I think it was like the Inns of Court or something. And, the firm would have a table and it was pretty pricey and people would say they were going and then just not show up. And like, you want to talk about some angry partners? Those people were angry.
Yeah, because I think the thing with summer associates that they may not realize is that partners get a list of everyone who's coming ahead of time. And, you get it right before. So it should be, the latest list.
Right.
And so they actually a lot of times notice that someone was supposed to come and wasn't there. Or there's name tags a lot too. So they can see who didn't take one.
Yeah, I always feel like lunches and things too. People would either not show up because they didn't think it was important, like the kind of lunch and learn type things. But the point is somebody actually spent time and energy putting this program together, and they probably are going to take offense if you just blow it off and decide you don't want to feel, you don't feel like going.
Mm-hmm. I would also, something to clarify that I think comes up in this area a lot is if someone sends you a calendar invite, that you accepting it is you saying that you're going to go. So there are different things. Sometimes you might accept something just to get it on your calendar, but sometimes there's not a separate RSVP. So if you're not sure, I would clarify because I did find that some people just didn't understand that meant they were saying they could go.
Right. No, that's a good point. And yeah, I think your point, I mean, obviously things come up, but you want to be sure that you've notified someone as far in advance as possible. And that might be the last minute, but at least send something to the person who would want to know this information. Be like, hey, I'm really sorry something's come up at the last minute. I'm working on a client matter or whatever. I have to go to court. A meeting's running long. And I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to be able to make it. At least, I feel like that's just basic politeness, but I guess people don't do that these days.
Yeah, I think that there's rarely an excuse where you did not have a minute to do that, unless there's an actual emergency.
Yeah, and even then,
other than that,
you're still probably en route to the emergency with your phone or whatever. You can send a text message for 2 seconds being like, hey, emergency situation. Tell you more later.
Yeah, I think there's never a reason not to let someone know. And then when you're at the event or the meeting, another big pet peeve of mine and other people's would be not paying attention, using your phone. People can see you.
Yeah.
Even in a video conference, people can see you.
Yeah, I feel like anytime you're in a professional setting, in any type of meeting or event or something, you want to at least try to appear engaged. Like particularly if you're the lowest person on the totem pole, like your job should probably be making notes or at least paying attention, not obviously playing solitaire on your phone. That's not going to make people happy.
Yeah, or I've seen people fall asleep with there's management there and a summer associate fell asleep. And I had to kind of knock into them.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you're tired, but I mean, you can pinch yourself. You can go get some water. You can be take a bathroom break. There are things you can do.
Yeah, that just should not happen. I just think sometimes people don't realize that other people can see you.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, if you're in the room or you're on a call, other people are paying attention. And another one that's fun too is when sometimes you'll be taking a conference call, say from your office, and people think that they're on mute and they're not on mute, and you can hear them doing all kinds of crazy stuff. These are things you just want to pay attention to. I mean, A, probably don't do crazy stuff on a conference call, but B, if you are going to do it, double check that you're on mute.
Yeah, there's definitely some stories about that.
Yeah, I mean, these are the things people remember. Oh my gosh, remember that person who did this crazy thing? I mean, conference calls are boring. People are going to remember if you're the one who screws everything up.
Or a video conference, you don't realize that they can see you. For some reason, it seems like it's the pre-conference.
Right.
I've seen people kind of walk in front of the camera and do weird things.
Yeah, exactly. Or be taking other phone calls on their private phone. Just think before you act, basically.
Absolutely. Another thing would be not treating everyone with respect. So that means you're going out for a lunch and being nice to the wait staff or, secretaries or paralegals or really anyone you meet. There shouldn't be a situation where you feel you don't need to be respectful of them. They don't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes with being a decent human being, but definitely goes with being in a professional setting, because the reality is, if you are, say, working for the summer in an organization, you're only going to be there a few months. I mean, maybe you come back later, but maybe not. But, a good paralegal is actually very hard to find. And if you're rude to that person or you're entitled towards them, or you say something that implies that you think you're superior to this person based on the fact that you're sort of an attorney and they're a paralegal, that is not going to be well regarded, because that person is actually extremely valuable to the organization.
Definitely. And if they've been there a long time, they know people.
Yeah. And they know how things work.
They have an impression of you. Everyone's, and you're going to need their help.
Yeah, exactly. It's it does not behoove you to be rude to people that you think are beneath you in some sort of organizational hierarchy, because those are the people who actually are going to help you get your work done. And if they're on your team, they're the ones who can really save you in a situation where you realize you screwed something up, you didn't file something correctly, you don't know how to file something, somebody asks you to do something, you have no idea where to start. These are the people who will help you. So treating them badly is definitely a terrible, terrible idea, and really will make them hate you, because they're very, people tend to be very sensitive to that sort of thing, particularly from people who are just there for the summer.
Definitely. I think, people develop reputations really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And this is kind of, in your early days of your legal job, this is the start of your legal reputation.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
What else?
Another thing would be saying some joke that's off color, inappropriate, offensive. Fun. I think if you have any question that anyone might be offended by what you're saying, just do not say it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think particularly in the current environment of, Me Too and all these things, why would you risk that? Just don't be an idiot. And maybe, you feel in your heart of hearts this is preventing you from saying things that you feel you otherwise might want to say. Well, you know what? That's life.
Definitely. I just think that, maybe you didn't mean it in a certain way, but if you think there's any chance that someone will take it wrong, everyone, I think has a gut instinct about things that are maybe like on the line.
Well, and I think too, like there are certain topics that there's just no reason to be discussing in a professional setting.
Absolutely.
If you find yourself feeling like you want to tell a slightly sexist joke, or like the memes, like, people spread around memes where you're like,
emails.
That's not okay. Like, this is a professional workplace. Do not send around the stuff that you would send, like, to some locker room friend of yours if you're a dude. I mean, probably don't even send it to them, but certainly don't send it to like your, coworkers.
Yeah, I just don't think that there's any need to do that. This is a professional setting. And I think along the same lines, I'd be careful about, gossip or anything like that. Things you're kind of spreading around. I would just stay away from it.
Yeah, too. And I think in that category too is like hitting on people inappropriately, which frankly, it's usually inappropriate in a workplace setting. If you're only there particularly, for a few months. Certainly, I know of at least one person who was not given a summer offer because several different women went to the HR person and said, you know what, this is what he's been doing, and I feel like it's really inappropriate. And not only did he not get an offer, I believe he was actually fired in the last week.
Wow, that's pretty drastic.
It was pretty consistent, It was just one of those things where you're like, yeah, this is really inappropriate, and you've done it several times. We don't want you here. Like, you're a risk that we cannot take.
And I'm guessing the person was probably like talked to before, they kept doing it. I think that's the other thing. If you, make a mistake and then just continue to make it.
Yeah. I think obviously if anyone comes to you over the course of a workplace and says, you know what, we've had some complaints about this and we want to bring it to your attention, do not do anything like that again.
Yeah, and don't be defensive. just don't do it, because someone has a problem with it if it's taken it that far. Another thing that I think is a huge pet peeve for people is not saving things on the system, saving them locally to your desktop, or sending them to yourself or whatever it is. So that may mean that after you leave, they don't have access to it, or they're looking for it and you have to send it to them and they can see that it's not from the system. And I think partners particularly get very mad about it.
Yeah, I think this is just one of the situations where you need to understand what your organization does in terms of document management, because they almost certainly have some type of system. And, you might not realize what those numbers printed at the bottom mean, but it means that that's a unique identifier for this document, and anyone who needs to find it can find it. And if yours can't be found, I agree, that's a huge problem. And it just makes you look like lazy, like you don't care, like you don't understand how this works. It's not a great look.
And how what you do affects other people. And along the same lines, making sure that it's saved with whatever security it's supposed to be saved with. So don't leave things open that people need access to, but give the right people access. You should know all that. You've definitely received training in it if you're working there. So, and if you have questions, you ask somebody.
Well, and another thing, too, is if you're ever asked to submit something with redactions or something like that, you have to be absolutely certain you know how to do that, because there are tons and tons of cases of documents being filed electronically, and then it turns out they're not really redacted. And obviously, you're redacting information that should not be public, and now that information is public, and it might end up on, the Washington Post or whatever, depending on what your case is. And you don't want to be that person who's on above the law, is like, oh, this person didn't know how to redact a document, and now all this non-public information is out in public. You can't put it back.
And the things with these documents is there's always a way to figure out who was doing what to it.
Yeah, exactly. You know who edited that.
Yeah, so you're not going to be able to hide behind it. And along the same note, actually, don't look at things you're not supposed to look at. So don't open things on the system, because that is a big problem.
Yeah, you have to understand all of this is being tracked. Most likely no one's ever going to look at this, but if they ever need to look at it, it's going to be really obvious who opened something, that you edited something, that you saw something. Just don't go poking around in things that you have no business being in. You're working in a legal setting, have some discretion.
Absolutely, because people are, trusting you with things, whatever your position is. Another big thing is taking credit for things, that you didn't really do. or not giving other people credit for things they do. I think always err on the side of, being generous.
Oh, I agree. I think it just makes you look petty if you if you take responsibility, if you basically take credit for things you didn't do, or you refuse to take responsibility for things you did do. This is a team setting. So if somebody says, oh, that was an amazing brief that you filed. Oh, thank you. We had a lot of help from the team. Everyone did a great job on it. Really appreciate it. That just makes you look like a better person, basically.
Yeah, I think you should always, err on that side of things.
Yeah, and on the same thing, if somebody has really helped you out, like say that you're, a paralegal or a secretary really saved you on something, make some nice gesture to them, offer to buy them a coffee or even just a thank you card saying, hey, I really appreciated what you did for me the other day. I realized it was last minute and you really helped me out and I just wanted to say thank you. Put in a $10 Starbucks card is not going to bankrupt you.
But I think it will make the other person feel really good. And,
no, because almost no one does that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, small gestures, or even, if you're even if they haven't done anything, and if you have a secretary and you're going to get a coffee, like occasionally offer to get them something. Probably they'll say no, but at least they appreciate the offer and maybe they say yes, and you spend a couple of dollars and this person's now like more on your team.
Mm-hmm. I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, huge, because almost no one does that.
Yep.
All right. Anything else?
Messing up anything that is going directly to clients. And even communicating with, them when you're not supposed to. You really need to understand, what the protocol is and, not make mistakes there because they're the ones paying the bills.
Yeah, I think sometimes people really overreach in that area and they think like, oh, I'll just shoot an email off to the, general counsel that's our client, which might be fine. And maybe nobody has a problem with that. But you need to clarify first. You want to basically have in writing like, hey, do you want me to send this directly to Bob or would you prefer to send it yourself? And then if the person says, oh, you can send it, and then they complain, you're like, hey, you told me to send it.
Absolutely. And I think you just kind of need to figure out where your place is in things and, how the person in charge of the case wants you to, to handle it.
Yeah, and sometimes it can get tricky if you're getting calls directly from someone or emails directly from someone with a question. But there again, I think you just always want to defer to, oh, thanks so much for like sending me this. I'm just going to check in with like, whoever.
Because you don't want to say the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, or you can just check in with them directly and be like, how would you like me to handle this? That's always going to be appreciated. But you don't want to go like off-roading and be like, hey, yeah, so I was doing some research and kind of thinking this. Like, not a good idea.
Whole case. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just, partly is you got to train people to talk to the right people as well. So if you are getting a bunch of these emails, it might be the case that someone higher up needs to say like, hey, can you send this to me instead? We don't want Allison like directly giving you answers on this, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not really your problem. No, I think all of those are absolutely on point. My personal pet peeve, which really makes me hate working with someone, is when they just don't take responsibility for their work product. And they may be the nicest, like most entertaining person in the world. I might like them. I might enjoy hanging out with them. But if they are not taking responsibility for the work that they're doing for me, I will get very, very upset. So things like turning stuff in late or just sending me things that are sloppy, or my absolute most pet peeve, coming back at the very last minute after I've given them an assignment to find some piece of law and telling me that they can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, A, that's not my problem. You've made it my problem, but this should not be my problem. And B, why am I hearing about this now?
Mm-hmm.
Like the time to tell me this would have been part of the way through your research when you're hitting some dead ends and you come back to me and you say, hey, this is the research I've done. Here's what I've uncovered. I haven't been able to find exactly what you're looking for. What would you like me to do? But just to come back at the last minute when we're expecting an answer and say, oh, well, I did a lot of work, but I didn't find anything, like makes me want to kill that person.
Yeah, that seems like very poor communication.
It is. And I think a lot of this is really about communicating, and really understanding your role in a hierarchy. If you're coming over for the summer or you've just started a job, whatever that organization is, like you are being relied upon And your job is basically to make your boss's job easier. Like you want to be thinking, how can I make their life easier? Not how can I make their life harder by dropping things on them at the last second that I've dropped the ball on, because they will hate you.
Well, and I think especially kind of as a summer associate or someone really junior, sometimes people sort of think they're not that important to it, and it's almost
they think it's kind of like play.
Yeah. And
it's like, oh.
Same thing when they say like, they're submitting a draft and there are typos or it's like, oh, well, I would never expect this to go further. And, that's not acceptable.
No, every single thing you do, you need to assume is going to be sent out without further edits. And so I think, that like a draft does not mean like a sloppy first draft. A draft means it is as ready to send out as you could possibly make it within limits, obviously. There may be questions, you may clarify, like, do you want me to do the citations now or not? But ask those questions.
Yeah, and I think you can look at it sort of as an empowering, situation where you're important and they actually are relying on you.
Yeah, I think that for me was one of the biggest adjustments of like being a summer, was realizing like, oh, they actually need me to be doing this work. This is not just like pretend. They're not just giving me this assignment for practice. Like they actually need an answer. And that's a responsibility that I'm, is kind of fun to take on. Like, oh, I need to find that answer because someone needs this.
Yeah, I think a lot of summers do sort of have that idea that these are kind of made up. And there are some summer assignments that are like that, but they try not to do that. Like try to have it be real work.
Right. I mean, if you need something done and you have another person who can do it, why not give them something real to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's better for everyone. And then you can bill it to the client and actually like make some money off of them. So I think, as a partner once said to me, which I thought was obnoxious at the time, but I do think is actually accurate. He said, your job is to make me look good. And what he meant by that was like, if you screw something up, it makes me look like an idiot. And I don't like that. So, your job is to figure out what I need and then make that happen. And sometimes that might be menial things like making the right number of copies, which I think is what this particular discussion was about. And I'm like, well, you never told me. He's like, you should have figured it out. That was your job.
No, I think that's absolutely true that, you have to kind of see where you are in the chain and what you're doing and how, it's contributing to everybody. And so, that's how this works. And then at some point you'll be higher up, and someone will be helping you.
And you'll be the one yelling about the number of copies.
Exactly. And you'll probably say the exact same thing.
Right. And you might think to yourself, wow, I really should have told them I needed 6 of everything. But you'll still tell them they should have figured it out.
That's true. I mean, the truth is there's other people probably not communicating well in these situations too, but they're not really going to admit that. So
yeah, exactly.
You just have to figure out how to ask for things too. Yeah.
I mean, if something went publicly wrong, you're probably not the only person who made a mistake, but it's probably going to come downhill to you because you basically were the person at the bottom who really should have been asking these questions.
Absolutely.
So I think this is like the key takeaways here. Basically, like, don't make your boss's jobs harder. And then, as we talked about earlier, try not to create new problems by just doing things that are stupid. So like saying stupid things, hitting on someone, like getting super drunk, like those are just not really acceptable.
I think a lot of this is common sense. But
well, as they say, less common than you might think.
Yeah. Well, I also think you're in a new environment a lot of times. And so maybe you're not kind of sure how it works, but I would always err on the side of caution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you always want to be thinking, do I really need to say this?
Yeah.
If it's anything remotely questionable, like how might this be perceived? Who's listening? Who might the people who are here go talk to? And, I think that's a key point. You can't just assume because you look around the room and you're like, oh, everybody looks like me, that you can say whatever like racist thing you want. Like that's not acceptable.
Definitely. And I think you have no idea what people really think or, what their political beliefs are, all that stuff. I would just keep that out of it.
Yeah, and also I think stuff about like how people look, dangerous territory, just don't go there. Even something you think might be innocuous, like, oh, you look great today. If somebody said that to me, I may be like, what business is it of yours?
Yeah, or I think it could make you think like, oh, are you saying I normally don't look good? Or, or
are you hitting
things.
on me?
Yeah.
Like, what is this about? Like, why? Just don't.
Yeah.
Similar stuff, like asking anybody, for example, if they're pregnant, if they're getting married, if they're getting divorced, like unless somebody brings this up to you, just don't go there. Like stay away from these topics.
Yeah, or even like, you see pictures, you're asking who people are. Like let somebody share things with you. I wouldn't like pry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like even if people have, pictures on their desk, like there's just no reason really to comment on it. I mean, maybe something very like, oh, are those your kids? Even that can be a loaded question. I mean, presumably if somebody has it on their desk, they're happy to talk about it. But I don't know. I feel like you just don't know. Like, wait until you know the person to like delve into anything remotely personal.
I completely agree. And it's even, sometimes you feel comfortable with them, but I just think you don't know what the answer is going to be. So again, I would be cautious.
Yeah. Oh, another thing, this was another massive pet peeve for me. Never ask people to make or get you coffee unless they are specifically employed for that task.
Yes.
I mean, the number of times that people ask me as a young female attorney to get them coffee, and I was like, are you joking? Like, no.
And I think the other side of that is, why don't you go get coffee and ask other people if they want anything? They're going to appreciate that. Yeah, which is where
you're like, are you thinking here? Like, think about the optics on this one. Who do you turn to in a room of attorneys to ask to get you coffee? The youngest only female person in the room. Like, just don't go there. Go get your own freaking coffee.
Absolutely.
And I think too, you've got to understand, like, you can't just assume support people are going to do things for you, so like, if there's a system, say you need to get reimbursed for something or whatever, like you want to understand how that system works and to do your part. And it may be that your secretary is supposed to compile all of your receipts or whatever, but, at a minimum, you're going to need to check that that's accurate. You're going to probably sign off on it. You can't later blame somebody if, your receipts didn't match up with your expenses and you get fired over that.
And I would say you should ask how all of these things work. Usually there's kind of a form at the beginning that tells you, how to do certain things, but there may be things you don't know. So would ask what's the limit for how much you can spend on different things, because the last thing you want to be doing is be the person who went over and expects the firm to cover it. And like you said, I remember I would sometimes just get receipts from people in the mail as the recruiter.
What am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, like that's not how it works. There's a form that your secretary fills out. I don't do this for everybody, and it's offensive because it feels like you're asking people to do things for you that aren't their job, and you haven't even taken the time to figure out, who does what. So that's a really easy way to make people upset with you.
Right. And, anytime that you're dealing with someone who this is their job, like say, for example, an IT person or like a law librarian, and you come in and you've clearly given no thought to how this actually works. You haven't read anything that they carefully prepared to prep you on this. Of course, people are going to feel offended because it's like, okay, you can't even bother looking at the handbook that we carefully wrote for you. Like, why are you wasting my time on this, basically? Like, go read the book that I put all this information into.
Absolutely. And I think there's rarely things that aren't in that category that haven't been given to you that you're really going to need to know. And so I think it's just good to do your homework and, be responsible.
Yeah, and again, like take responsibility. If somebody has presented a program to you about how to do legal research and then you go and blow through $30,000 in a day and don't even find an answer, like that's not going to be well received. People are going to remember that.
Yeah, and you should know, especially with money, what you're spending, what the limits are, what they expect of you, because that's going to definitely get you a reputation early.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this, like you said, is common sense. You want to clarify expectations. Always make sure you know when a deadline is. Are there preliminary deadlines? If not, should you create preliminary deadlines to get feedback on something? What are your deliverables? What are you specifically being asked to do? Who are you working with? What other information is there? All these things, like you need to ask the question so that you have a clear idea. Okay, this is what I'm being asked to do. This is the time frame. If it's not realistic, ideally, you want to say that in the beginning, but you definitely want to say that as soon as it becomes apparent. Like, hey, this was seeming like a bigger project. Like, here's what I've got so far. Here's the time that we've allocated for the rest of the project. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that in this time frame. Like, what do you want me to do? someone's going to be way happier about that than if you just show up at the end and you're like, well, I spent twice as long and didn't really find an answer.
And it really is all about communication. I think sometimes people are afraid to say something to someone where they think they're not going to be happy to hear it, you know? But it's so much better to do that than to put it off. And that's what I find that people get the most upset about. And they'll talk to me after and I'll say, you know, why were you hiding this? Like, what were you doing?
Like, if you know there's a problem, you basically need to make that clear to other people as soon as you have figured out the parameters of that problem and what you might possibly do to fix that problem. But that problem needs to be surfaced as soon as possible.
Because I think ultimately it's on you. And sometimes, you know, the idea is, well, someone else told me to do it, you know, but you're the one managing all of this. It's your work or whatever it is.
Right. And this is also, you know, the CYA question. I mean, if someone did tell you something verbally, it's probably a good idea to send something in writing summarizing that conversation.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be anything big. It's like, hey, you know, as we discussed, I'm going to get you this stuff by the end of day Thursday. This is exactly what I'm planning to send you. If this is not what you're expecting, please let me know as soon as possible. You know, to kind of document everything that could come back to haunt you if you think someone above you is giving you kind of bad advice, but they're insisting on it. Put that in an email like, hey, as we discussed, you've asked me to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to do that. Another thing sometimes people don't really get is like voicemail is not really like things people necessarily listen to. I mean, obviously you should listen to your own, but you know, if somebody doesn't answer and you're expecting to call them, leave a voicemail, but also give them something in writing. So whether it's a text or, you know, whatever your, you know, organization uses or email, but something so that when they come back and they say, why didn't you call me? You say, well, actually, here's the voicemail and here's the email. And at some point they're going to be like, oh, okay.
Absolutely. And I think that just helps you, you know, keep track of everything and make sure that, you know, they know that you've done your best.
Yeah, exactly.
To do it, you know, and things happen. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Stuff happens,
technology.
But you basically want to have you want to have that trail where you're like, actually, I did call you at the time we talked about, and I left a voicemail, and I sent you an email.
Yes.
So what else is there to say about this? You screwed this up, not me.
But don't say that, probably.
No, but that's the unsaid part where you're just like,
and they'll know.
Actually, yeah. I mean, they get the message. You know? Literally, they'll get the message. That's like, oh, I was the one who did this. And I think too, you know, if you are in that scenario, like you can't take it personally if somebody's not there for a call because they got stuck in court. I mean, things happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we're almost out of time. One final question. What should people do if they screw things up? Like, how can they repair any damage?
Well, I think like we just said, as soon as possible, let the person know so that they're not procrastinating talking about it. You know, and that could be whatever, you know, they missed a deadline, they missed a meeting, they, you know, do your best to apologize, not be defensive. I wouldn't make a ton of excuses. I would make it really clear that you're not going to do it again and don't do it again. So, you know, a lot of times if like a summer is having trouble with someone on an assignment, and maybe it didn't go great, we usually say work with them again, give them a chance to see that you're better, and then be better is the big thing. So I think that most people will give you a chance, even if you do screw up, if you kind of acknowledge it and try to make it right.
Yeah, and I think some of these conversations, to the extent possible, should happen in person.
Definitely. I think that things can be really misinterpreted other ways.
Yeah, I think, you know, ideally you do it in person. You basically show up and you grovel in person, which is pretty rare these days. So I think people actually do respect that you came by and you sat there and you said, you know what, I recognize that I screwed up. Here's why it happened. Here's what I'm doing to prevent it from happening again. And this is the solution to the problem. You know, second, call them. And then third, which I think is a distant third, is you do it in writing. But I think if you can, you need to have an actual conversation. Because most people, too, in person are going to be more accommodating. You know, they might be angry and type out an angry email, but they're probably not going to like completely go off on you if you come, you know, in a spirit of apologizing in person. Yeah,
and I think what's interesting about that is people tend to sort of be afraid to do it in person.
Right.
And it's going to be better. So you got to kind of get over that. I also think it's a good experience because that's better.
Yeah, exactly. It's good practice. I mean, worst case, somebody yells at you in person and that's not pleasant, but oh well, it happens. They'll probably yell at you less than they would in an email.
And it's some story you tell later. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a learning experience. You're like, wow, that was crazy. Yeah. All right. Well, any final thoughts on this?
Common sense is really my top thought. Don't do things that, at work that aren't supposed to be, you do things at work that are meant for a professional environment. Don't act like work is, camp, college, whatever. I think some people, especially summer associates, are sort of too casual. And you have to remember that these are your colleagues, they're professionals, they're lawyers. And
you're a grown
treat
up.
it that way.
You're a lawyer.
Yeah. You can have friends outside of work that you talk to about all of these things.
True. There are lots of topics you probably just don't want to go. And people sometimes will try to goad like the younger people on the team into talking about things about outside of work stuff, like, are you dating or you're on Tinder or whatever. Like, just don't go there.
Absolutely. I just think that you can wait for, some other opportunity to talk about personal things.
Exactly. All right. Well, unfortunately with that, we are out of time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careeraddicted.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.